Good afternoon. I'm Pat Crowley, Associate Vice President for Advancement Communications at the UCF Foundation. Thanks for joining us this afternoon for an exciting panel discussion where we talk about entrepreneurship in the time of COVID, presented by UCF and Dr. Phillips Charities. Before we get started, just a couple housekeeping items. This session will be recorded. Everyone's microphones, save for the panelists and the speakers, will be muted during this presentation. Now it's my pleasure to introduce to you UCF President Alexander Cartwright. Dr. Cartwright was named UCF's 6th president in March of last year. Prior to coming to UCF, Dr. Cartwright served as the chancellor of the University of Missouri and is recognized for his research and scholarly work in photonics. I can say if you have an opportunity to talk with Dr. Cartwright, you'll quickly see he is a fierce advocate for student success. He really cares deeply about our fellow Knights and working to provide experiences and opportunities that help them truly reach their full potential. Since coming to UCF, Dr. Cartwright himself has had to deal with the pandemic pivot, helping to lead this major research university through an unprecedented time as classes and events shifted to online formats. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Cartwright. I hand the virtual podium over to you.
Thank you so much, Pat. Thanks to everybody for being here. And I want to give a special thanks, of course, to our friends at Dr. Phillips. As all of you know, UCF and Dr. Phillips have had a long tradition of partnership and support. We appreciate that very much. UCF was created in 1963 by the Florida legislature, and our first classes, of course, were in 1968. And that was actually when Dr. Phillips made its first philanthropic gift to the university. So long partnership. And throughout the years, that's remained a very positive partnership and I believe is having a significant impact on all that we have done and all that we will do into the future, from academics to athletics. We certainly have celebrated the generosity of Dr. Phillips charity by naming a signature building on UCF downtown campus, the Dr. Phillips Academic Commons. I was just there today, and it's great to have such good friends who value the work we do and lend their support. So thank you for everything you've done for us. Since coming to the UCF about a little more than a year ago now, I've learned that this is a special place, and I've talked a lot about the opportunity and the potential that UCF has, and that opportunity and potential has to do with partnerships with the community and all of the things that we can do together. But I have to say that opportunity and potential in and of itself doesn't do a lot unless you have the people who believe that they can take advantage of those opportunities, that they have the courage to take chances and to continue to move forward. And that's what I've seen in my first year here, is for sure. UCF has a culture, belief that we can do anything. And our amazing faculty, staff, students in the last year demonstrated that. As we had more and more challenges because of the pandemic, people stepped up. They did things differently. They looked at different opportunities for how we might be able to continue to educate, how we could continue to provide opportunities for our students on campus, our housing, everything that had to be rethought. And again, that was our staff and our faculty and our students who stepped up to think through it differently. What's amazing is that you see that sort of entrepreneurial spirit throughout UCF, and you see it as we're now exiting from the pandemic. You start to see an interest in how do we take the best things that we did during the pandemic, things that we may have not thought possible in the past, and apply them to our future. Learn from what we've done, learn from our challenges. And I'd say the healthiest organizations, they don't see challenges as things that are going to burden them, but rather an opportunity to innovate, an opportunity to come up with other ways to do things and to really excel. And I feel very proud of what everybody at this institution has been able to accomplish with such a large institution, to be able to quickly transition, to be able to effectively deliver education to our tremendous students, to be able to participate and be a true partner in all of the decision-making process for the institution. I always felt that all of our administrators and our staff and our faculty, that we were all working together to think about how we get through the pandemic. And that is something that I want us to continue. And I don't think that would have been possible if it wasn't part of the culture that we already have at UCF. And certainly it's one that I look forward to us continuing into the future. And that culture goes beyond UCF in that it's with our entire community. Within Orlando, Central Florida, we have partners that we work with all the time. And I know that we would not have been able to do everything we did if we did not have the support of so many people here. Moving to the future, we see so many things are possible, and they're going to be possible again because of the partnerships that we're going to build with all of you, and that we have already built with all of you. And this fall, we are looking forward to this fall looking very much like fall of 2019, and that we will have a robust activity on our campus. We've always remained open, but I think you'll see a much more expanded version of that again in person at the university. And I look forward to those days. I look forward to being able to spend a significant amount of time with all of you here in Orlando, and getting to know more about what's possible between UCF and all of our tremendous partners. Again, thank you for everything that you've done. And I really look forward to this panel today, because I'd love to learn from the incredible speakers we're going to have today about what they did and how we can learn from their lessons. So thank you so much to everyone. And again, thank you, Pat.
Thank you, President Cartwright, for joining us today. We appreciate your insight. One note, President Cartwright has elected to turn off his camera during the panel discussion, so his video may disappear on your screen, but rest assured he will remain as an active participant throughout the event. I now have the pleasure to introduce our panelists joining us today. First is Angela Alban, President and CEO of SIMI, which has expanded over the years to provide a range of innovative technologies and services that are conceptualized, researched, developed, and manufactured in its laboratory right outside of Orlando here in Winter Park. Angela is a UCF alum. Welcome, Angela.
Thank you.
Next, we have Sara Bernard, a partner in Holland and Knight, an international law firm. Sara counsels clients on a wide range of commercial real estate matters. She is also a UCF alumna and served on the UCF Alumni and UCF Foundation Board of Directors. Welcome, Sara, and thank you, of course, for your volunteer leadership at UCF. Next, John Rivers is the founder and CEO of 4 Roots and 4R Restaurant Group, which features various popular restaurants we're all probably very familiar with, including 4 Rivers Smokehouse and many others. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Patrick.
And next, we have Ken Robinson, President and CEO of Dr. Phillips Charities, which is composed of Dr. Phillips Inc. and the Dr. Phillips Foundation. Dr. Phillips Charities has been a crucial partner and visionary in the development of our UCF downtown campus. Welcome, Ken, and thank you for having Dr. Phillips Charities be a co-sponsor of today's event.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm excited about being here with everybody.
Thank you all for taking time out of your day to share some of your lessons learned with our audience. And with that, I'm going to jump right into the first question because time is limited. As we know, the pandemic has impacted each industry in very different ways, and there's a few of them represented here. Would each of you share what was the main challenge you faced in your specific industry? And I'd like to begin first with Angela. Hello, Angela.
Hi, good afternoon. Mine is probably a little different. I am primarily a DoD contractor. And so most of the work that we do involves and requires the support and access to DoD professionals and DoD facilities. So we had to be pretty agile about some employees that we have in DoD facilities and be able to create a way for them to continue to be productive and to be able to do their jobs from home temporarily as they were slowly phased in as the COVID protocols were put into place at those bases. But here locally, we had to also be careful. We have a small team and every person is very important. Some are more compromised or vulnerable than others or could be compromised. And so at that combined with the fact that we're running out of space was a very interesting time to be creative and to make it work. We've, by the grace of God, have made it work and have been very grateful. But basically, it's just dealing with the constraints that you have. And in our case, we had a little bit more with those external folks that were on post somewhere else in the United States.
Thank you, Angela. Next, we'll move on to John. Certainly, restaurant businesses throughout the country have been impacted. Share some of your insights, please.
Absolutely, Patrick. And yes, restaurants have been hit across the country. Over 180,000 restaurants have closed in 2020, almost 16% across the United States. And we're fortunate in Florida. We've had some favor as far as opening and seats. However, everyone was compromised. The biggest compromise we saw is actually still lasting, and that's with the team members. When we lost business overnight, we lost 50% of our business literally in 2 days. And that created severe cutbacks on team members. And those team members have now shifted, and not just with us, but with the industry, outside of hospitality. They've gone and they've either found other jobs that they can do, or that labor issue exists today. It's still our number one challenge we face. People, the stimulus checks have really adversely had a huge impact, not just on hospitality, but the overall industry itself across the United States. We're currently sitting at 72% of what we need to actually run our restaurants and our catering business. And the catering business and restaurants they're gaining ground very, very quickly. So that challenge that we're facing is really starting to compound.
Thank you, John. Let's move on to a different industry and Sara Bernard.
Thank you, Pat. It's hard to say just one challenge that we had. I'd say there were three really big challenges that law firms face, technology not being one of them. The vast majority of law firms were already working on a remote platform before the pandemic. Lawyers need to be able to work at any time and from anywhere. And so I think the biggest legal challenge to us was that it's hard to maintain a culture of collaboration and collegiality, which is essential to a law firm when you're working in a remote environment. And so we try to find creative ways for colleagues to get together via Zoom. We hosted trivia nights, wine tasting parties, cooking classes, virtual museum tours, just to name a few. But that said, people are the most important asset of any law firm. And so amid the pandemic, the focus for us turned immediately to our people, the health and well-being of our staff, particularly in a stressful environment as law firms can be. And then you tackle on isolation and long-term isolation. Many firms were turning their focus during the quarantine to wellness initiatives, work-life balance, caring for their administrative staff by providing for necessities, mental health support and training. And lastly, I'd say another challenge for us as lawyers was not having access to business travel. So business development became very strained during that time period. And when you're in crisis management mode, you're really just trying to hold it all together. And so we couldn't have those face-to-face meetings with clients, couldn't attend seminars, and we had to find new and innovative ways to connect with our clients, whether it's to develop new business or to maintain our existing business.
Thank you, Sara. And moving on to Ken. Hello, Ken.
Well, hello. You know, it's interesting for Dr. Phillips. We're a grant-making organization. So people think just strictly about the money that we gift out. And there was a tremendous need increase within the industry. If you're an arts organization, your revenue went to zero immediately. if your education organization we serve, then your expenses went up. And so we saw different needs throughout the different organizations we served, and we tried to be patient, learning what those real needs were going to be and how the government would respond to them through the PPP. But beyond that, there's impact to us as well, was the corpus of money that was left to us by the Phillips family to manage is invested in the stock market. It's invested in real estate. And overnight, we saw those investments drop 30%. And so we had to be patient and allow them to come back, which they've come back very strong and to the positive. So we couldn't try and time the market or react too much to the market. We had to really stick to our patience. And then in our real estate, with over 100 tenants around Central Florida, they all had different impacts and different needs. And those range from people serving the theme park industries that their revenue dropped to zero, to others that weren't as critically impacted. And so we had to treat each of them as individuals, just like we do our staff members, and find out how we could best work with them through this crisis. And I'm proud to say we retained all of our tenants and have worked through it with them.
Wonderful, thank you. Hopefully, at this point, we are emerging out of the pandemic. And of course, as they say, hindsight is 2020. Looking back, what is your biggest takeaway through this past year or so? I'll say your aha moment. What was that? And Ken, I'd like to start with you with that question.
I think our aha moment was not letting the sky fall. The sky was falling for a lot of people, and we had to slow the process down and really try and understand what was happening in there. The second part, I think the aha moment was just being proud of the staff and how prepared they were. They kind of saw this starting to come. We aren't as technology-based as a law firm might be. We embrace it, but not to that same level. And so getting ready to work remotely was a very crucial part of us being able to stay alive, stay active in the business and be able to react to people's needs.
And since you mentioned law, I'm going to bounce it over to Sara. Your aha moment.
There's so many takeaways, Pat, from 2020. It would be really hard to whittle it down just to one major takeaway, because it wasn't just the pandemic that changed us forever. It was the widening of the economic inequalities, the global conversation on racial injustice. All three of these major events have impacted us on a global scale, from individuals to businesses. So if I had to select one takeaway, I think it would be the importance of businesses, regardless of the industry that you're in, to modernize your operations. The digital transformation that we've seen across all industries in the last year is just absolutely incredible. It's as though we advanced 10 years out into the future, which would have, in 1 year we advanced what would have taken 10 years to advance. And so I think the pandemic not only accelerated technology in the way companies conduct business, but also impacted consumer behavior in a way that, like I said, would take another decade for us to see those changes. So I think businesses need to be adaptable, they need to be modernized, and always working towards the future. I think that was my biggest aha moment.
Thank you. On to John Rivers. Hello, John.
Sure. Thank you, Patrick. You heard the word pivot a lot. It's sometimes overused, but if there was one thing that we had to do and that we learned, was when the market pivots as rapidly as it does, and the pandemic certainly forced that in lots of different areas, as Sara had just shared. In our particular business, we watched prior to COVID hitting, less than 20% of our business was enjoyed outside of the restaurant walls. At the height of COVID, over 50% of our business was being eaten and enjoyed outside of the walls. And post-COVID, it's actually settling down to 42%. So the market has shifted exponentially from the way that we did business prior to going into it. And we hear the word pivot, but the important thing about it is you've got to pivot very quickly. You've got to understand what your market needs are, what your customer needs are, and especially when we were facing the potential of the brand going away because business had dropped so much. you've also got to be willing to pivot outside of your normal boundaries. If the guest and your customer that you're trying to serve has a need that's different from what you typically did before, you can't burrow in and say, this is our business, this is our limitation. You've got to go to where that customer is in order to survive. And I couldn't be more proud of our team of how they did that and how much they did move. And the other big aha moment was, realizing that we can work remotely. We're meeting right now. We're having a panel that I doubt a year and a half ago would have even been a consideration to do on Zoom.
Absolutely. Thank you, John. And let's move on to Angela for that very same question.
I think the aha for me was because I'm an engineer and introverted. I didn't realize how much human interaction was a part of my success and my happiness, as well as that of my employees. So we were ready for that digital transformation. We were already providing that because one of our company mottos is family first. And so we've always made it very easy for employees to be able to do as much or at least plan around their work and do it remotely if necessary. But definitely, we slowly started trickling certain folks in, and it became apparent that it was affecting our ability to actually perform as we had before. And so we just, like everyone else did, we had to be agile. We had to react to the market, and we had to adjust how we did business and maximize the opportunities for our team to work together hands-on because of the things that we're manufacturing, designing, prototyping. So definitely that was educational for me. And like John said, I never would have envisioned that this was the case. But in the past, I would have preferred that panels were like this, but now I want it to be in person. So it's definitely been a learning experience for me.
Great. Thank you, Angela. Maybe someday we'll get to meet in person. Prior to COVID, and now hopefully post-pandemic, UCF has successfully positioned itself as the university of the future. It's integrating its work with business and industry pretty well. But there's always room for improvement, right? And as you think about your respective industries, how can UCF or higher education in general help you innovate? How can UCF better prepare the workforce of the future? For that, I'll pass it off first to John.
The one thing that one of many things that COVID did is it expedited the speed of change in the marketplace. Be it technology, be it communications, be it even personal relationships and interpersonal relationships that you have. If I had to pinpoint the things that I say that we need most moving forward, especially from a college like UCF, it's analytics, it's trend analysis, and it's technology. You're always going to have the cook in the kitchen. Okay, you still got to make the food, but how to get it to the guests, what that guest wants, and the different means that they don't want to touch anymore. They want everything to be payless. Those are things that didn't exist predominantly in the hospitality market prior to COVID-19. And now they are absolutely a way of life. And I'm convinced that they're not going to subside. I think that they're going to continue to grow. And for us to stay ahead, we need help understanding where the market's going and how we can get there before the market does.
Thank you. Let's move on to Angela next.
I definitely agree with everything that John said. The only thing that I would add, we try to bring in as many UCF interns as we can. And I'm finding that I wish that they had more mature communication skills in the workplace and that they were better prepared for the day-to-day in a professional setting. Typically, it's in the College of Engineering and Computer Science. And so I'm not sure if that is something or a program that exists. I actually will have to ask Dean Georgiopoulos, but it is, I think, something that's going to become more and more important because as our methods for communicating and negotiating and doing business, like John said, change and evolve, these young graduates are going to have to be mature enough to not only perform, but adapt and change. And they're going to have practice to do that before they actually graduate.
And Sara, what are your thoughts on this subject?
Yeah, I mean, I think John and Angela took the words right out of my mouth. I would echo everything they'd say. UCF is this large university where businesses have access to top talent right in our backyard. And so I think maintaining those partnerships, increasing those partnerships, and providing them with that real world experience and prepping them for that is really important. So I agree with everything Angela and John said.
And Ken, what are your thoughts on preparing the workforce of the future?
Well, first, John, I'm a little nervous about cooks in the kitchen going forward. You know, we're seeing medical surgery take place now without a doctor in the room. So we might see some restaurants change on that.
That's my job, Ken.
Well, yours is important. You will always be there. It's interesting, you know, the communication skills. That's really, I sit here and think about technology being so important going forward and the digital divide between generations that sits out there. And but the communication skills are going to be so critical, especially when, you know, we think about an entrepreneurial spirit out there in the community. And with change like this, there's great opportunities for entrepreneurs. And so they've got to have that interpersonal skill that's set in there. I mentioned earlier, real estate is a heavy focus for us. And so what does real estate really look like 10 years from now and 20 years from now? And the School of Real Estate is going to have to be able to answer that. I think there will always be offices, but you have to have those in order to create the relationships, in order to create the culture. But really, what does it look like? And that'll be an important part for UCF to play a part in.
Thank you, Ken. At the beginning of the pandemic, a little over a year ago, certainly businesses, all of us were scrambling, as we've really never dealt with something like this, at least in recent history. What were some of the things you did which may not have worked as planned? And what did you do that worked, right? That's always a good learning opportunity when we try something and perhaps it doesn't succeed as we had hoped, but you learn something from that. That's probably the biggest message here. But also on the flip side, what did you do that really took off like a shot and you knew that it worked well? With that, we'll start first on that question with Angela.
So I think for us, the fact that we had that digital infrastructure in place, and we actually are in the process of implementing new processes to get both certification for CMMI and for ISO. We were kind of in the middle of that. And so we had to expedite that a little bit because things were changing rapidly for us. And being able to process a purchase order was now very different than it had been in the past, even before COVID introduced itself. For us, it was really, what really worked was our ability to still maintain the same level of loyalty, I think. We have a small team still, so I think that's part of it. We're all very close, and I personally meet and get to know every employee and their families. So when you have that kind of culture and have invested in that kind of culture, I think that it definitely pays back dividends. And as a result, it wasn't until probably 4 months after that we said, okay, we have to go back. This is starting to affect the ability to integrate a mechanical component with an electrical component, as an example, more streamlined way to do that. So we're able to survive operating remotely, if you will, but certainly what was the biggest surprise is what I mentioned before, is that the need for that interaction and being able to touch and feel and share dynamically. And, you know, there's a lot of benefit to this medium for sure, but it lacks that. In our case, it's just like healthcare, the healthcare visits that you can do, the telehealth. I mean, those are great if you know what it's like to always have a sinus infection, for instance. But if you don't, how could a doctor properly assess that? There are just some things that we still can't do through this medium. And so anyway, those are kind of my surprises and some of our successes.
Thank you. John, things that didn't go well as you originally planned, but then some successes?
There are, and you know, Patrick, that's okay. You know, failure is not necessarily a bad thing. You know, the willingness to fail, you have to have that willingness to fail. It's a prerequisite to success. You know, and quite honestly, if you haven't tried something that you failed at, I often encourage people, you haven't failed, you haven't attempted something worthy of your efforts. You know, you have to keep going for things that aren't necessarily easily achievable. And in a situation like in 2020, you certainly really had to go for thinking outside of the box in order to survive. And, you know, we did some things that, you know, certainly didn't work, and some things that were way outside of our box. You know, when the grocery market started hitting walls with toilet paper and eggs and chicken, you know, one of our folks on our team said, hey, you know, we have plenty of access to this. Why don't we start a grocery store in our to-go lines? And within literally 2 days, we had the 4R grocery going at 23 locations across the state. And we all celebrated. We were meeting daily as a team, and we never thought this day would come that the highest ranking rating that we got on customer reviews was for our toilet paper. And that was certainly a surprise to, you know, a restaurant organization. But, you know, that you have to be willing to step out, like I said earlier, and go where the customer is. You know, the things that, you know, are most important, you know, that we have learned from it that will continue, is that push to technology. You know, that, you know, particularly because our customer base has moved off a premise and they're dining. And, you know, the one store that performed the best out of the entire portfolio was actually the one store that has a drive-through, the one out in Winter Garden. And I set out a challenge to our team. By the end of 2021, I want every one of our locations to either have a drive-through or a drive-up capability built in from a technology or an actual construction perspective. And the one out there by you at UCF, matter of fact, we are putting in for permits to have a drive-through. You know, and who knows how long that'll take, but let's just say they'll probably meet the goal by the end of this year.
That's great. Thank you, John. I can't say I live out towards Winter Garden and I work here towards UCF, and I'm thrilled with the drive-through. So that's wonderful news. Ken, moving on to you, please.
You know, I think for Dr. Phillips, the thing that we probably learned quickly was that we needed to be empathetic to the grantees we work with, and letting them know that we're here for them. And we couldn't solve all the problems right away. We couldn't just throw a ton of money at any of this and make it go away. So we provided smaller grants early on, made it very easy for them to come by them, up to $20,000. And then when we really further understood the problem and the depth of it, then we could deal with the larger requests that they might need. And I think for our staff, likewise, having that same empathy and understanding, because they were dealing with things like schools being closed and the need to be home with their children, or they were dealing with a loved one who was at home who had health issues that they weren't nervous for themselves, but they were nervous for their loved one at home. So accommodating as much as we could staff in different ways was important for us. I think those were the big learning things for us.
Thank you, Ken. And Sara.
So Pat, in terms of what worked well, I look at it on two different levels, one on the firm-wide level and another on the individual level. On the firm-wide, the first thing that most law firms, and certainly Holland and I was among those, was we formed a COVID response team. During crisis, it's very important to be able to disseminate information that is moving very quickly and to be accurate in providing that information to clients. And so we worked around the clock to provide real-time information on rapidly changing laws and government orders. On an individual level, we've, you know, having been through the 2008 financial crisis, I know that when an event occurs that has a widespread economic impact, the best and perhaps only way to ride it out is to focus on the fundamentals and principles of customer service. I believe it is important to stand by good clients during times of crisis and to invest in their survival and success. And so I immediately reached out to all my existing clients to ensure that their needs were being met and to guide them through the chaos, serving not only as their law counselor, but also an advisor to help them manage this crisis. When you're there for clients during difficult times, I think it invariably deepens your relationships. And when they emerge, hopefully that relationship is stronger. But in terms of what didn't work, you know, I think even though most law firms were technologically advanced, you know, we had not been doing meetings on Zoom and Microsoft Teams and things of that nature at the level that we were doing it both inside and outside the firm. And so I think in the beginning, there was a lot of fatigue, some Zoom fatigue, and a lot of missteps because there was really no training on how to set up your camera the right way, how to set up a background the right way. Maybe you should be wearing a full suit head to toe just in case you stand up, you know, I mean, little faux pas like that. So I think there were some let's say logistical challenges in how do you deploy the new technology that I think is now the norm.
Thank you, Sara. All of your businesses and industries have seen, you know, through trial and error, changes, right? You've evolved. I think Angela said, you know, or somebody had said, and we did 10 years worth of innovation in a very compressed time. When you think about the changes that were made, some temporary, perhaps some permanent, do you think some of them will become permanent? And how do you think these changes will impact your businesses moving forward? And Sara, let's continue the discussion with you on that.
Yeah, I think there's so many changes that will stay. I think one of the biggest ones that we'll see in the legal industry is that there will be more flexibility when it comes to working remotely in the future, more reliance on technology just in general. And I think the court systems will now adopt that as well. You didn't see, you can go into court and have you know, a trial during the quarantine. And certainly as we are emerging out of quarantine, you can even have remote hearings. So court systems have adopted this technology as well. In terms of transactional practices like real estate, which is what I do, and corporate, I think that we were already accustomed to doing what we call mail away closings, and I think that will continue to be the norm, but there's a whole host of technology out there that we were not doing, whether it was electronic notaries, electronic filings, things that I think are now going to be part of our routine. So I think there's going to be more reliance on technology, more flexibility in the workspace. I think law firms will reassess their needs in the office in terms of downsizing and maybe doing some sort of co-office work share environments. And I think those are changes that will be lasting.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sara. Let's move on to Ken for that very same question.
I'm with Sara. I think that office space will change and people will be working remotely more than they ever thought of before. With the technology that's sitting out there. On the grant side, on the nonprofit side of the world, it's an awful lot of it is driven by events, and a lot of fundraising is driven by events. A number of nonprofits found that they could raise an equal amount of money with less expense by doing them remotely. As much as I enjoy going to 3 and 4 events a week, I haven't missed them as much as I thought I would during this pandemic. John's smiling because he gets to go to a number of those himself, and I know Sara attends a number of them. So we think that the nonprofits will change a little bit of how they do their business. I hope they do and learn from this. And then from staff perspective, you know, if you look at my demographic, my age, we grew up where you came to work no matter what, right? If you had a cold, fight your way through it. If you weren't feeling great, fight your way through it. There will be zero tolerance going forward for somebody showing up at work with a sniffle, with anything. And there shouldn't be. I mean, there should be zero tolerance. We really need to change the health of our workforce, and that's one way we can go about doing it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ken. I remember some of you may remember comedians joking about when the pandemic first started, if you sneezed in public, all of a sudden you felt like a pariah, right? And it could have been allergies, for Pete's sake. Angela, talking about some of the changes in your industry and what may or may not become permanent. Share with us some of your ideas.
I think there's going to be more flexibility when it comes in my business. In our world, we travel a lot to different locations to meet with the subject matter experts. And sometimes it's very productive to do those in person, depending on what you're trying to do during that exchange. But there are a lot of, not obviously, but during COVID, we did pretty much everything remotely through Zoom. And I would say it was 85% effective. So from that point of view, I think there's an opportunity to realize some cost savings and some efficiencies that I think we were taking for granted before. In my case, I was pretty much on lockdown and sat at this desk, I don't know, 20 hours a day, and no longer driving from nonprofit to nonprofit where I was on a board meeting, for an hour plus the drive there and drive back. This way I could do it from home, and I could be able to be engaged in other things during that travel time. It was very efficient in that way. So there are some efficiencies for sure. I think there's room for us to maybe do a hybrid of this in the future more so. And it actually made us change a little bit because we were starting to not break ground, but work with a builder to build a new facility. And I was going to occupy all 20,000 square feet. But because of COVID and how we were able to adjust, I actually reduced our size and now going to lease out the remainder of the space. So I think there's some efficiencies to be had for sure. I definitely agree on the health front. I have never been healthier in my life. And I've always taken care of myself. I've always washed my hands, but other people don't. And limiting the exposure to those germs, whether it be through the protocols or through just not being physically present with each other, has definitely helped a lot in that regard. So I think people are a lot more aware of those potential dangers and are going to be a lot more sensitive to that. Because yes, there are a lot of us that would go in and work regardless of how we felt and whether we had a temperature or not, which is now crazy.
Absolutely. Thank you, Angela. Let's move on to John for your insight with that.
Yeah, I'm a little backwards on one thing, but I kind of like disruption. Whenever there's a disruption in the marketplace, it translates to an opportunity, one way or another, either from a growth perspective or from an internal perspective. The changes that we made, that we were forced to make during COVID, we're running the most efficient that we ever have from a labor, from a food cost. Our bottom line has increased and dramatically. And I have to say, it would not have happened without 2020 and what we went through. There's one of my favorite writings is actually by Marcus Aurelius, and it's called "The Obstacle is the Way." When the obstacle itself that you look at as the burden that's going to stop you, no, it actually is what's going to propel your growth and to get you to that improvement or to that victory or whatever it is that you're going for. And in our particular case, aside from the business improvements, we saw two major changes that are absolutely lasting. And one of them is called our Feed the Need program. We saw an opportunity with students who were away for the schools and potentially not having access to their food and their summer meal programs. And we teamed up with our friends at OCPS, and within 1 week of helping serve those summer meals in 2 or 3 sites, literally within 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we were at 46 different sites in 6 different counties around the state, and served over 1.7 million meals to people that needed it. And that wouldn't have happened without COVID-19. And in the midst of that, the one thing that jumped out at us is we saw how much produce was going to waste in the fields from our Florida farmers. You guys remember that article that was in the paper and had that beach picture, just like a truckload of squash and peppers out there? And that kicked us into gear, and we started going out and talking to all of these farmers, through our Four Roots Farm and the program that we're doing there. And we started getting that excess produce before it went bad, helping them with the harvest and bringing it in and turning it into meals. Well, that cycle continues today. And what it did force is those relationships that we established with the farmers. Now we've been able to pull all of that Florida produce into all of our restaurants. And we just got a report from Fresh Point, who's our distributor, just 2 weeks ago. And Four Rivers, our chain, the whole portfolio, is ranked #1 in the entire state now for buying from Florida farmers for the entire state. And that would have never, ever happened if it wasn't for COVID-19. So a lot that we have to be grateful for in the midst of all that havoc.
Well, congratulations on that. That was a lot of hard work and a lot of planning, but again, you pivoted and got to it. And I like what you said as far as you like disruption, or at least, you use it as an opportunity. And some people may be a little concerned with disruption, of course, or a little risk adverse to that. I was talking to a colleague just prior about how I worked at a hospital system years and years and years ago, director of community relations marketing. You never know what's going to walk through the door, right, at a hospital. That's why you have back then a big binder of a policy manual. So you were sort of always prepared for the most common kind of stuff. Certainly pandemic was out of the ordinary. But when you think back about crisis management, what advice do you have for entrepreneurs just starting their business in this regard as far as crisis management? And John, we'll start with you.
You know, in the one thing that became apparent was the need for communication amongst the team. Because if you remember, for weeks there, policies were changing almost daily. What you could do, what you couldn't touch, what you had to wipe down, who could get their food where, and we met as a senior team every single day for 2 months straight from 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock. And it always started with, let's get an update of policy. And, that over communication may have been burdensome, but it not only got us through the challenge, but it endured our team. We showed that, I was fortunate to have see Dr. Cartwright this morning, and he used a word that so much speaks to our culture of our business, and it's do anything. Nothing is going to stop us. If whatever that challenge is, we're willing to tackle it and go through it. And that really solidified that and galvanized it as a team. And that piece I'm incredibly grateful for. The second piece is, for the young entrepreneurs, since you asked that question, is, when a crisis happens, the team looks to you to be the leader. And you need to be the strong leader. That's when they need it the most. It's not when things are going well. It's when things are derailed and challenged that people will look to you. And the thing about that, when you are in that position, has to be a willingness to be vulnerable. I've always said that the currency of the current leader today is vulnerability. Because when you're vulnerable, you allow thoughts and ideas to come in unthreatened. Okay, and you're okay to make a mistake because now the team is truly working as a team. So we always welcomed ideas, mine or others, and we always shot them down or we always propped them up, and it was okay. No one ever did it from a personal basis. And I think that those two pieces are so absolutely vital for any style of leadership, being the young entrepreneur to the CEO.
Thank you, John. Moving to Sara, what advice do you have regarding crisis management for entrepreneurs just starting out?
Well, I love everything that John just said. And I too have two pieces of advice. I would say first, you want to build your business to be anti-fragile. Fragility, anything that's fragile breaks under stress. And a business that is anti-fragile will actually get stronger under stress. And so the key is to analyze your business and focus on a business plan or a business model that has at its cornerstone the fundamentals of anti-fragility. One thing the pandemic showed us almost immediately is that businesses that gain from disruption and randomness, just like John said, will dominate, whereas businesses that are not prepared or not adaptable will be hurt to the point of a catastrophic loss. One of the hallmarks of an anti-fragile business is that they're continually solving problems as opposed to waiting for the next crisis to hit before tackling a problem or assuming that the same problem is going to occur again. And so there's a great thought-provoking book out there called Anti-Fragile that I recommend business owners to read. And the second piece of information or advice that I would kind of give to young entrepreneurs is that you need to build for the future. There's an old adage used in business that if you're not growing, you're dying. And I think that's important for all businesses, regardless of the industry that you're in, to be mindful of. But to be clear, growth has to be done in the right way. It's not about modernizing your operations or simply increasing revenue year over year. That's definitely part of it. But the fundamentals about having an organization with a growth culture is paramount. Having strong leadership, like John just discussed, is absolutely paramount. And then communication of your goals and embracing those goals as an overall organization. One thing that I learned early on in my career is that businesses that don't grow, generally speaking, do not attract the most talented people because great people seek growth opportunities. And we all know that recruitment and training new personnel are enormous costs to a business. And so if you mitigate turnover, you're actually in the best position for growth.
Wonderful advice. Thank you, Sara, for that. Moving on to Ken Robinson.
Well, thank you. First, I'd go to work for any three of you. You're all very inspirational in that sense. So thank you for your words on this. My words of advice for entrepreneurs are: 1, be prepared. Number 2, be flexible. Number 3, adapt. I couldn't agree more with what John's saying and what Sara is saying, that change. Change is good. I've said that from the very first day I walked into business. A lot of people don't adapt to change. If you can embrace it, it's an opportunity to grow and become better at what you do, learn more, and differentiate yourself from the competition. It is so critical. And I want to go back and take a moment of privilege here and just say John's Feed the Need program was such a great example of that, where the restaurants are slowed down. He's had to lay off a number of his staff members, which absolutely broke his heart. I know him personally, and he feels a personal responsibility to every one of those staff members. So the Feed the Need program really created an opportunity to bring them back to work and give them the jobs that they needed to manage their families through a crisis like this. So it was beyond just feeding people, it was giving hope and opportunity to staff. And so that was wonderful, John.
Thank you, Ken. And Angela, what is your advice?
I think one of the things that John said really hit home with me, and it's that it's really important, especially in my case, I didn't have a business degree. And like I said, my personality leans more to analysis. You have to be constantly learning about yourself, about becoming a better leader, investing in that development as a leader, because you have to be ready for anything and everything. It's important that as well as being vulnerable as a leader, that you're humble and that you're not afraid to fail. Failure is an opportunity to learn, and you have to be able to accept the potential of that failure in order to be able to be there for your people when they need you, for your team. You have to be ready to make decisions in a timely manner, and you can't hesitate or be paralyzed, suffer from what I call paralysis due to analysis. So that's one of my natural tendencies, and I've had to grow out of that because I can't hesitate. What I instead can do is work actively, not only in my personal development in that regard, but also in putting together and keeping a team that is ready to provide me the advice that John was talking about, because your perspective is not always the only perspective, obviously. And it's very important to take that consideration into account when you're making these decisions. And with respect to one of the more revealing outcomes, and it's totally unrelated, about COVID for me was the need that we have in this community to feed families, and how apparent it became when all of a sudden one of the largest school systems in the county had to come up with a way to distribute food to these children practically overnight. And that just gives me goosebumps that that even in a community as ours that is thriving like it does, that this is still a problem. And thank you, John, for what you've done and your leadership in helping to address and bring light to that problem.
Thank you, Angela. Yes, a lot of issues have risen to the top, haven't they? They've come into the limelight, although they've always been there, but we are now more aware. So thanks to everybody's help with that. We only have a few minutes left, so my last question is, as we start to evolve out of this climate, what demands do you anticipate for your industry? What do you see coming up? Quickly, because we just have a few minutes left, and we'll start with Angela.
Oh, geez. I think it's in the government space, it's always about doing things better, faster, and cheaper. And I think that all of these changes and these evolutions in the way that we do business is going to, we're going to be expected to apply these lessons learned to be able to accomplish that.
Thank you. Ken.
You know, one of the beauties of this country is we're a very resilient society. And so I think we'll recover fine and we'll do well. I think people will learn to have a stronger cash reserve going forward. It's going to be critical. And whether it's in your personal household or in your business, you need to make sure you have that. But I think going forward, the need to escape the drag of this economic burden is probably the most critical thing we have facing us.
Sara, what are your thoughts?
I agree with everything that Angela said as well. Better, faster, cheaper. I think that with the technology that's out there now and the attitudes that have changed and consumer behavior that has changed, I think clients are going to be less willing to pay for business travel. And so I think that will not get to the levels that it once was. And from the employee perspective, I think that we've proven that we can be just as effective at home as we are in the office place. So I think the demand for flexible work time is going to be embraced by employers. And lastly, I think the office downsizing is going to occur. Like I mentioned earlier, I think you're going to see smaller office spaces and more efficient office spaces.
And John, your thoughts on the subject?
I think I would add to Angela's better, safe, better, cheaper, faster, safer as well, both from the employee base and from the customer base. Things that weren't on our radar before 2020 are, driving decisions of who we work for and where we go to eat or watch movies or what we do. And I don't think that's going to subside. And the number one thing is right now is labor. Since it is so thin, we're really realizing the importance of the things that we have to offer as an employee or employer to the potential employees to gain their trust, that they want to come work with us. And like Sara said, a part of that is flexibility as well. So if I haven't said it yet to all you students who are listening, if you need a job, we have lots of openings all over the city. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you, John. And this does wrap up our pandemic pivot conversation. And I just want to thank our panelists for taking time out of your busy day. You've got a lot going on, but we learned a lot, and I greatly appreciate your time. And I hope that our audience that was Zooming in today pulled away some nuggets from this as well. So thank you so much. Thank you to President Cartwright and Dr. Phillips Charities for partnering with us to make this panel a reality. And special thanks again to our panelists, Angela, Sara, John, and Ken. You really made this a very special hour, and it flew by quickly. I will say, if anybody that is listening in has any questions, you can please share them via email with Carolina Silva, and she put her email address in the chat for everybody, carolina.silva@ucf.edu. And I do want to thank Carolina, who is the wizard behind the curtain, who really worked with our OIR office in making this technologically perfect and planning as well. So thank you, Carolina, and the team behind the scenes that you don't see here. It's been my pleasure to be with you here today. And as always, go Knights and charge on. Thank you. Have a good rest of the day.